So in one of my most recent videos, I focused on the generational comparison between two of the greatest footballers that have ever lived, Pele and Lionel Messi. A video which I think is fair to say certainly garnered a much busier reaction than my small little channels used to. Though realize, while the volume was certainly unexpected, the actual premise of majority of the comments were not. Because not only did a huge chunk of the comments involve these weirdly obsessed Messi fanboys bringing up Ronaldo for some random reason, as I predicted they would in the video itself. Emotionally unstable Messi fans online either do one of the two things. Number one, randomly start talking about Ronaldo, okay. Or two, but there was also another common argument in those threads that's also been used quite a bit now by idiots over the years. The gist of which is basically, Pele apparently played in an easier era and therefore wouldn't be as good as Messi and Ronaldo had he played today. Christ. Yeah, so here's why this argument is beyond stupid. Okay, so there are a couple of ways to think about this. Firstly, if you're implying that Pele had it easier because he never played in Europe and therefore played against farmers in friendlies or whatever the fuck you heard on Twitter. Yeah, I don't know what else to tell you other than the fact that you're objectively wrong, which isn't really all that surprising considering you're most likely a combination of someone who's unaware and is unwilling to unlace his brain to understand how unequivocally unfair your undermining and underrating of these undeniably unmatched legends are. Look man, it's always best to do your research before you speak about something. Or just trust me. Trust me, Pele played at the highest level. Now as for the second way you may look at this, if you're someone who's implying that Pele had it easier because football was worse in his era, this is where I have the bigger issue. Not with you saying that football was worse back then, of course it was. It was also worse as recently as 4 years ago. It's evolving every day. But that doesn't mean that Eder Militao is better than Paolo Maldini ever was. You fucking tool shed. And likewise, football being worse in Pele's era simply isn't a valid argument for him not being as good as Messi and Ronaldo had he played in this era. Why, you ask? Well, first of all, how dumb are you? And secondly, you do know that Pele wasn't a time-traveling gypsy who had access to all the nutrition and technology of 2024 and then traveled back to the 60s to play against defenders who didn't have the same access. That's not what happened. The man had the exact same advantages and disadvantages as anyone else on his level in his era and still emerged as the greatest of his era. And similarly, if he was born in the modern day, let's say 1990, he'd have the exact same access to the technology, nutrition, tactical understanding and everything else that defenders of this era have, and therefore it'd have been a level playing field as it was back in the 60s when he was playing, and therefore he'd have the exact same results as he did in the 60s when he was playing, which is rising to the very top. You starting to get how this works now? And by the way, this works both ways. Like take Messi and Ronaldo for example. Much like the Pele example, if these two were also time-traveling gypsies who had access to all the advantages of 2024 and then traveled back to the 60s with those advantages, yeah, they'd have a laugh. But again, they ain't time-traveling gypsies either. So instead, if you want to theorize how Messi and Ronaldo have done in Pele's era, think of them as being brought up in that era, i.e. being born in 1942 or whenever, and therefore having the same advantages and disadvantages as everyone else did back then. And then ask yourself, you really think Messi and Ronaldo would have found it easier in Pele's generation without modern medicine, nutrition, technology, and changes in the laws of the game? Do you? And by the way, think about this with specific consideration to Messi and Ronaldo. You really think these two in particular would have been as good back then if they didn't have the advantages they enjoy in the modern day? Cristiano Ronaldo, the guy who's probably made the most of modern day technology to improve himself than any other footballer around? Lionel Messi, the guy who literally needed to be injected with chemicals to even stand a chance of being a pro? Brother, if you think these guys would have had an easy ride in the 60s, you're an actual kid. But that's the thing, I'm not saying they wouldn't have hacked it either, because while the nutrition and technology wouldn't have been there to make them as good as they are, the advanced understanding of the game that modern defenders possess wouldn't have been there to make it difficult for these two either. Ergo, it'd have all balanced out and they'd have comparatively reached the levels they did end up reaching in the modern era, which was, yes, the very top. And to drive my point home just a little more, I reiterate, if Pele played today, he'd have taken advantage of the modern day technology to make it easier for himself, but at the same time, the tactically intelligent defenders of today would have made it harder for him. So once again, it balances out. And therefore, sorry, but this Pele played in an easier era rubbish is just that. Rubbish. So instead, if the two players you're trying to compare played in similar enough positions and played at the highest level for their time, you should just compare their achievements and individual qualities they possess and form an actual educated opinion. I don't doubt that I'll be hard for most of you, but please do try. And no, it's not a coincidence that these arguments are used by younger faceless idiots, by the way, because they are the same ones who scrape at the bottom of the barrel to pick the dumbest shit ever when someone even as far as implies that there's a player from the past that's even remotely comparable to their precious Messi and Ronaldo. And yes, as I said, while I am getting quite used to those kind of comments and even predicted them coming in my last video, this player X played in the past so he won't be good today argument, although this is pretty old itself as I said, I've only seen recently pop up this much. And you know what makes it even worse? Most of you make that he played in the past so he won't be good today argument when discussing attackers. You f***ing helmets. If anything, attackers have it significantly easier nowadays than they did back then. I mean, where do you want to begin about football back in the day? The scarcity of the bookings, the poor pitch conditions, the fewer and very early on zero substitutions, the level means offside rule. I mean, even in comparison to the 2000s, let alone the 60s, practically everything now favors attackers more. After all, it's no coincidence that goal scoring records are now being broken more frequently than they'd ever had been before. But again, I am not implying that Messi and Ronaldo would have failed back then, because these guys would have gotten used to playing under those conditions and eventually would have reached the levels they did in the modern game. You finally starting to get why discrediting football from the past is so f***ing dumb? If not, here's another summary. So in summary, if you want to compare Pele to Messi and Ronaldo, you have to either imagine Pele growing up in the modern era, so that eliminates factors such as him playing at a time when the game and sports science was less advanced, as he'd have access to the same advantages as everyone else in this era. Or you have to imagine Messi and Ronaldo growing up in Pele's era, and that'll eliminate factors such as these guys not being used to the physicality, pitch conditions, as well as changing of the rules, as they would have been used to these things since they would have grown up with it too. So all in all, it's an all balance out. And one more time, regardless of the era they'd have played in, the best would always be the best. Now as far as who is the best, well, that's your opinion, but just don't let brain dead shit like this era's argument cloud your judgment, please, because as you saw from this video, that shit is fucking dumb. You did see that from this video, right? Please tell me you did. Like, bro, man literally wrote up bullet points and shit. I could not have made it any easier to understand. Idiots. And that is that. Agree? Of course you agree. Bye bye.